Hello.
I just shut my mic off. Hello. I am going to be setting up here for a minute, so I'm going to turn off my mic and my camera, uh, and then I will come back in just a couple of minutes.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah. right. It is noon, so I will go ahead and get started. Currently, I've got everybody muted in the chat. And so if you have a question or um, you need me to pause on something, please feel free to unmute yourself and let me know. My name is Stephanie Evans Wondra, and I am here today with Cascade Health. I'm very excited to be bringing this topic to you, and it looks like we kind of hit on something that seems like it's important to people because there are a lot of people signed up for this class today. So that's really exciting. Welcome. I do want to point out the very beginning of this title, a workshop for women and their loved ones. I recognize that we may have some people in here who identify as other than women, and that is totally fine and great. I am coming at this from a hormonal aspect in some respects today. And so when I am speaking of women, I am speaking of people with estrogen in their system. So I want to be very clear about that. All right, let's kind of get started with this. So today we're going to look at the impact of ADHD on the daily life of people with estrogen. We're going to look at the challenges around seeking a diagnosis, and then we're going to look at treatment and support needs. We are also going to talk about some resources. Please don't feel like you have to jot those down, though you may want to, and that's great. I will be sending out a resource list after this. We have your email if you signed up for this class today. If somebody has just now passed this to you, please take note of my email at the end of the course and email me and ask me for the resource list, and I will get it to you. All right, let's dig in. So let's talk about the definition of ADHD, okay? This is a neurodevelopmental issue, okay? I want to be very clear about that. People are born with ADHD. This is not something you develop over your lifetime. This is not something that you catch. This is not because you sat in front of a television when you were little. None of those things. There are lots of myths around ADHD. ADHD is a neurodevelopment issue that this is how your brain was built, okay? It really is about processing dopamine, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. We really crave stimulation and interest. And when I say we, that's because I am somebody who was born with ADHD. So I will tell you too that it is kind of inappropriately named. All right. Attention deficit is not what people with ADHD experience. We experience an attention overload. We take in everything. So that piece. And then there is also disorder on the end of this. For something to actually be a disorder, it has to be less than 1% of the population. OHSU has done some studies recently, and they are thinking that the population of people with ADHD is right around 3.5%. Now then, if you take the CDC's numbers, they say it's at 6.5%. So somewhere between, 3.5 with OHSU and 6% with CDC. So there's a big gap in there. We're not entirely sure. What we do know is that the ADHD brain lives in kind of a mismatched society. Our neural traits were probably really, really useful back when you needed somebody to stay up all night and watch out for the rest of the group, those kinds of things. I really prefer a name that I have come up with that is far less stigmatized, and it is neuroflexion, because this is a neurological issue that we experience, and we are really good at flexing between different things. Now, there are things that, as far as executive skills, and we'll get into that, that we don't really do well, but some of them we do very well. So this neuroflexion, this flexibility piece, is what I really like to focus on for people with ADHD. You'll find that people with ADHD tend to flock to careers that this being flexible piece, right? This flexion is really important. There are lots of people in first responder kind of high stakes jobs, doctors, lawyers, counselors. Um, so there's this piece. We really, really, really are great in crisis, right? So that's another kind of people argue with the idea that there are gifts about ADHD. I am one of the people who believes that there are. Um, Being able to be flexible and still kind of hold your composure in a crisis, I think that's a gift. Um, all right. Let's see here. I want to check my notes, make sure I hit everything on this slide. All right. Um, so less than 1%, like I said, is a disorder. Anything above that is a variant. So I would really, like if I was going to rename this in the DSM, right, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, it would look something more like attention overload hyperactivity variant. So, but I prefer neuroflexion in that. And that's a word I made up. Um, all right. So let's look at kind of what happens for this. What are the core symptoms? Inattention can look like. Now, people do not have all of these things all of the time. Okay. Everybody with ADHD looks a little bit different, but there are some criteria that need to be met. You need to have 6 of these things within inattention: difficulty focusing or paying attention, making careless mistakes, not listening when spoken to, not following instructions, difficulty organizing, avoiding tasks that require mental effort, and losing things, being easily distracted, or being forgetful. So, 6 of those things with inattentive. Okay. Hyperactive looks like fidgeting with hands or feet, being restless, being on the go all the time, having difficulty relaxing quietly, being unable to stay seated, um, and being overly talkative. Okay. Then there's this impulsivity piece that kind of runs along with the hyperactivity for some people. This looks like difficulty waiting turns, interrupting others, blurting out answers before the questions are completed, things like that. As adults, some of that shows up for people. I also will say that impulsivity oftentimes also shows up as road rage for adults. Um, you kind of all of those things together, right? You look at all of those things together, and people have to check a lot of boxes to be able to get a diagnosis of ADHD. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. You might be kind of thinking, okay, so you're born with this, right? Um, how does this work? Genetics play a part. We have figured out that it runs down mom's lines typically. And toxins also play a part. So when you're looking at toxins, you're looking at things like pesticides, lead, plastics, BPA, air pollution, paints, disinfectants, things like that, that you may have been exposed to in utero. All right. So because we're talking about, like I said, how this shows up for people with estrogen, um, the prevalence rates between men and women. It used to be thought of that this was a boys' problem, right? And so it looked like boys were being the people who were diagnosed with this in droves comparatively. Now we know a little bit more. The old statistic used to be that men with ADHD comprised 12.9% of the people who had ADHD, and women comprised 5.6%. Okay. Now we're kind of looking at that and leveling that out. We don't have specific numbers yet, but the CDC is saying that research is saying now that the prevalence in women and girls is actually higher than in men or boys. And that makes sense when you kind of look at that it may fall down the mom's line. Um, ADHD is really often underdiagnosed in women for a couple of different reasons. Like I said, kind of thought it was a boy thing. There was that myth, right? Um, Traditionally, diagnostics have been focused on kind of more male behaviors when it comes to ADHD. So, more of that hyperactivity, right? If you're thinking about a classroom, right, and you're looking at the little boys who are maybe bouncing off the walls, whereas the little girls are not, that's where things have kind of started to go awry for diagnosing women. Girls with ADHD are kind of often characterized as dreamers or daydreamers, ditzy, not paying attention, not focused. And then as they age, they're more categorized as having anxiety and depression, not as ADHD. So now, because I have been working with this for a while, when somebody comes to me and they say, listen, I've been anxious and depressed all my life, the first thing I check is ADHD. Um, some kind of misconceptions about this. Uh, if you were smart in school or successful in life, you can't have ADHD. That is wholeheartedly incorrect. Hyperactivity looks the same in all genders. It does not. Women with ADHD just need to be more organized and to try harder. Also, not correct. And that hormones don't affect ADHD. I will talk about that in a little bit. And that women with ADHD outgrow it. That is not true. Um, so there are some myths and misconceptions around that. I cannot tell you the number of very intelligent people who have sat on my couch and said, I don't have ADHD, when I have asked them what they think about that diagnosis. Um, when somebody wants to kind of go back and forth with me about that, I will send them to somebody else to have them diagnosed. And I haven't yet had somebody come back to me and say, you were wrong. I'm sure that there will be somebody. I just haven't had it happen yet. Oftentimes, the myth of, but I'm super smart, I'm really a go getter, I'm on top of things, leads people to believe that ADHD couldn't have been an issue for them. So I want to just kind of put that out there. All right. When we're looking at people who have estrogen, um, we are acculturated differently, right? We are told as young children to be good, to be quiet, to attend to the needs of those around us, to know before other people exactly what it is that they need. We are told to strive to be liked and to do all of the things. And you may say, well, my parents didn't raise me like that. We live in a culture that tells us these things. So often we also feel like a fraud because we may have heard things growing up like, she has so much potential. If only she'd use it, right? It may have been in school that you could do really well in some things and then not in others, or that you could do really well in something sometimes and then not other times, right? So that good student piece sometimes falls apart at, say, middle school or high school when things aren't quite as structured. or in college when things are not structured at all, or if you graduate high school and then move into the working world, your structure is still really loose comparatively to being raised in a household typically and going to school. So you might see the wheels start to come off in those kinds of areas. Um, Inattention often looks like spaciness or confusion, losing words or train of thought. And that is really due to the overfocus of the things that are going on inside someone's mind. Hyperactivity looks a little bit different. Oftentimes, it looks like picking at skin or nails, um, moving from task to task without finishing the task, but then circling back around to finish a task, or not sometimes. Um, Hyperactivity can also look like tapping in kind of discrete ways, just working with your fingers or moving, wiggling your toes, kinds of things like that. And then oftentimes, kind of that life of the party person, the high energy, really humorous kind of person, that too can look like hyperactivity. I said before that impulsivity looks kind of like blurting out things, interrupting people. You may think of kind of your friend group, right? If you're all sitting around and you're talking, and there are conversations talking over one another, and you're listening to three conversations at one time, kind of thing. All of that works within that. It can also look like consistent inconsistency. One day you're on fire, you're getting all the things done, it's a great day. And the next day you're kind of like burnout and in bed because you've done all the things the day before. Um, Emotion dysregulation. There are lots of things that kind of run alongside ADHD. So, emotion dysregulation can look like a lot of things. It can look like anxiety, and that may even kind of bend towards OCD or disordered eating. Um, you may also see sleep disorders, things like that. Those will all kind of run co-occurrent sometimes for some people. Um, Depression can look like for people with estrogen, we have a higher rate of suicidal attempts. Um, so depression can look pretty like I can't get out of bed, I can't do the things. Um, and then that dysregulation piece may come from all of the overwhelm of all of that, and kind of holding it all in and masking and trying to keep it all together, and then absolutely losing it in a moment because you can't continue to keep that container closed. Let me just say too that doctors often hear mood swings with people with estrogen, and jump to bipolar disorder. Please know that bipolar disorder is truly a disorder. It makes up 0.53% of the population. Um, of the population, we're talking billions of people, right? Um, and that is equally seen between men and women. And the average age of onset with bipolar is early 20s. Okay. The mood swings that happen with bipolar are chemical, they're not environmental. And I'll talk about that in a second. So ADHD has a much higher percentage rate in the population, right? More in women. It's from birth. This is not something that just happens in your early 20s. Um, and the changes in mood are due to environment. For people with ADHD, things happen and our mood changes. Okay. Um, we begin to think things and our mood changes. People with bipolar, that is not how that happens. Okay. So if you are somebody who's been diagnosed with bipolar, uh, look at both of those things. Unfortunately, lots of women get diagnosed by their doctor with bipolar when in actuality, it's ADHD. So please be cognizant of that. Okay. Oops. I just skipped way ahead. How? Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. Um, Women with ADHD, like I said, tend to be seen as spacey or daydreamers. Um, we have a really difficult time finding proper support due to those misconceptions that I already talked about. You know, you can't be smart and have ADHD, things like that. And again, kind of back to that classroom setting, right? The people who are going to get diagnosed with ADHD are the people who are creating issues in the classroom as children. Oftentimes, that's not going to be a small girl. Like I said, everything's kind of up here. We have learned to mask our symptoms of ADHD and to overcompensate. Okay. This leads to burnout. We are often seen as super high achievers, and our ADHD often shows up in our mind instead of in our body. So, uh, you may be thinking, well, yeah, I'm not hyperactive like that. I'm not like you think of a small child who's a boy, right? And bouncing off the walls. That's not how I was. Right. That makes sense because like I said, in our culture, we're acculturated that we can't do that and still be liked. So, um, so given all of those gender stereotypes and misunderstanding, I'm hoping that you can see a picture of why it's so difficult for girls to be diagnosed when they are young. Okay, so let's talk about kind of the emotional toll of ADHD. Like I said, we have higher rates of anxiety and depression, um, because that oftentimes runs with ADHD. Um, it's a cycle. The anxiety of feeling like you can't do the thing, you can't get yourself motivated to do the thing, right? Then creates anxiety. And then because you've got anxiety about the thing, you can't do the thing. And then now we're depressed because we can't do the thing. It's a horrible cycle. It is not fun. It does not feel good. Um, so often too people are struggling with perfectionism and feeling inadequate, right? How come I can't keep it together? What's wrong with me? Those kinds of things. And then there's a real impact on relationships and social life because of um, the aforementioned anxiety and depression piece, and the emotion dysregulation piece of things. So women who are either undiagnosed or women who don't know a lot about ADHD, like I said, are kind of left questioning what's wrong with me? How come I can't hold it all together like most women do? Um, Oftentimes, too, there's a lot of emotion sensitivity that goes along with ADHD. We feel big emotions. Um, Many of us would say too that we are able to feel other people's emotions. This is called being an empath. There is some argument around whether or not that's learned or whether or not that is innate. And I would say that, especially for people who have ADHD, especially as girls, we are taught to read the room, make sure that we are taking care of other people. So we become very attuned very early on to making sure that we read other people's emotions so that we know what we're supposed to be doing. This is exhausting for most of us. Um, there is also a thing called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. It's not in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. But it is something that people with ADHD experience, and it's an intense emotional response to perceived, okay? That is the key word here, perceived rejection, criticism, or failure, okay? So if you're a loved one, you could be saying something in a very kind, very loving way, and your loved person with ADHD absolutely falls apart at what you've just said. That may be because they perceived what you said as being rejection or criticism or failure. I encourage you to look into this more if you're just learning about this. It's rejection, sensitivity, dysphoria, and people call it RSD. Let's see here. The emotional toll of ADHD may also look a lot like over apologizing. We, again, are acculturated that we want people to like us. That is innate. That is a human trait. If we didn't have that, we would be on the outside of the circle and we would die. So we really do want to be liked. We do care what people think to some extent. So when this rejection sensitivity happens, or people pleasing is often a thing that ADHD people also get into. The over apologizing becomes a piece of this, saying sorry basically for existing. Um, so there's that piece of this too. And then let's talk about kind of the hormonal fluctuations here impacting relationships. Hormonal fluctuations happen for things like postmenstrual, or excuse me, premenstrual dysphoria. Um, that's a disorder. It often, like I said, runs alongside ADHD, but it is PMS on steroids. It is people not understanding why the thoughts in their head turn really dark right before they start their cycle, why they think that they might want to harm themselves or someone else right before their cycle. Those fluctuations also uh, make ADHD worse. So, because estrogen affects ADHD. So, when you have a drop in estrogen, your ADHD gets worse. Okay. For some of you, this may be a moment where you're going, oh my gosh, no wonder I can't think of anything like 3 days before I start. Estrogen. Okay. This is why. So, um, your menstrual cycle, pregnancy, postpartum, and perimenopause are all times when functioning may be affected and become more difficult because of the estrogen effect on ADHD. A lot of women now are being diagnosed in perimenopause because, again, that's a spot where the wheels come off the tracks. Um, so the coping skills that they have kind of figured out, the systems that they have figured out over their lifetime to get by, not to thrive most of the time, they don't work anymore. And then uh, they're going in and getting diagnosed. Overwhelm and perfectionism also play a piece here in the ADHD part. Again, that anxiety and depression piece leads to overwhelm. There's also a lot of, like I said, this is not attention deficit, this is attention overload. So when you've got everything coming at you all day long, right, you're picking up more information than most people would in a week, in a day. Um, the overwhelm becomes extreme. Uh, for a lot of people, the overwhelm is so overwhelming that like it begins to make their skin literally crawl, because they're just too full. It's too much. So you could see how that might have an impact on relationships, right? I highly recommend that people find time in their day to be alone, period. Um, it helps with that overwhelm. The perfectionism, most of us from a fairly early age, if you really think about it, think, how come this is so difficult for me? Why is this struggle so hard? Right. And so then to overcompensate for that, we're leaning into perfectionism. And so then everything has to be perfect, right? Again, it takes a toll on relationships because not only then do we think we have to be perfect, we place that expectation on others. And so the perfectionism runs high and it can ruin relationships. Another thing that plays a part on relationships that affects people with ADHD is in that impulsivity piece, right? Overspending sometimes becomes an issue for people too with ADHD. And so that begins to put a financial strain on a relationship. And that may also play a part here. So um, all of those things together, I can absolutely know that when looking at this from this angle, ADHD sucks. People are like, oh my gosh, this is horrid. I will say that, like I said, there are some gifts that come along with this too. And the more you know, the more you can begin to set up systems to help in these areas where you're struggling. So we will get to some of that here today. All right. So balancing ADHD with family and responsibilities, right? Oftentimes, again, you've got that overwhelmed, anxious, depressed piece kind of swaying back and forth. It is this dance that people with ADHD do. And when you've got that along with the overwhelm, oftentimes household routines are non existent. Again, we're back to that consistent inconsistency, right? You may be able to get things done on one day, and then the next day you're like, I cannot do the things. You may find that you're putting your laundry into the washing machine and having to run it a couple of times because you've forgotten it's there and now it smells, right? Vinegar, put vinegar in it. It really helps. Um, and then you've forgotten to change it over to the dryer, or you've left it in the dryer for a week and now everything's wrinkly. Put a wet washcloth in there, run it again. It'll come out. It'll be fine. Learning to set up those kinds of systems that then help you function is a really key. But your partners and your children, if you have them, are probably impacted by a lot of this. Um, we'll have some suggestions for partners here at the end. But please know that those of us with ADHD so appreciate the patience that you do extend to us. Um, Again, with family life, that sensory overstimulation is really, really common. Uh, Even to, like I said, to the point where people's skin is affected. So textures on people's skin may not do well. I am somebody who cannot do tags. If I have a tag, I have to cut it out because my skin, it drives me bonkers. I will be um, thinking about the tag in my shirt instead of thinking about the rest of the things in my day. So textures for some people are really, really an issue. Um, Noises, loud televisions or radios. I notice for myself that when I have music on that I am unfamiliar with, that it it is too much noise for my brain. I can't do that. If I'm driving and somebody wants to play music that I don't jive with, I am happy to let somebody else drive. I cannot concentrate on music I don't know and concentrate on the driving. So noise oftentimes is something for people too. I will say that noise canceling headphones, while they are not cheap, have been a lifesaver for me because they block out all of the noise. I don't even have to have music playing in them. They just block out noise. The other thing is if you need to be able to hear things, right? If you have, say, a small child in the household and you want to make sure that you can still hear what's going on with them, highly recommend Loop earbuds, Loop, Loop earbuds. They're kind of a lifesaver. Uh, you can put them in and they won't block everything out, but they sure cut down on a lot of the noise. And then as far as the emotion dysregulation, I talked a little bit about this earlier. Um, Oftentimes people with ADHD, that overwhelm is the thing that like just turns the coin. Um, and a lot of the time we're masking, holding it all together until we can no longer hold it together. And then we blow up. Um, so it's not pretty. Um, but once you kind of begin to own it, then you can do something about it. Um, Again, I will say, not everybody with ADHD looks the same. So there may be people who have great emotion regulation, and that's fabulous. They are lacking in a different executive functioning area, and it may impact their relationship. Okay. I would be remiss if I did not look at sexual well being because we are whole human beings. Um, ADHD, alcohol use is higher for people with ADHD. And so when people drink, right, your inhibitions become lower, which may mean that we wind up in riskier situations. So that's something to look at, something to be aware of. Uh, the emotional connection piece, because of the overload that we experience, right? We are kind of running through life in fight or flight as people with ADHD. Um, it's impossible to find good emotional connection when that's happening. So, um, there are some ways to take care of the fight or flight that people are in most of the time. And we can get to that. But that is a piece of uh, sexuality for people, right? Is that emotion connection and wanting that within that whole realm. So managing that is oftentimes difficult. Um, and then during the act of sex, oftentimes women with ADHD say, it's not great because I've got so much going on up here. And it's just not great. Um, if you don't know who Emily Nagoski is, please look into her. She wrote a book called Come As You Are. She talks about three different types of arousal: spontaneous, responsive, and contextual. So these change over a person's lifespan. Okay. Spontaneous is absolutely wanting sex right after recognizing a sex related stimulant. Okay. Responsiveness is wanting sex due to touch or closeness. And contextual is having to do with the environment that you're in. Okay. And again, these change over a person's, not only over a person's lifespan, but maybe in a day for a person, right? You may think, gosh, when I was really young, it took nothing, right? Took nothing for me. Spontaneous, right? Um, and now if you're somebody who has children, you're like, I can't even think about that. Again, it may be responsive and or contextual. Okay. So again, and it could change over the span of a month. So please know that you have to be communicative with your partner about what you need. Again, Emily Nagoski, she's great. Um, really, really good information. For those people who have a lot of distraction happening in their head, I encourage you to focus on the sensations that are occurring within your body. That will help. Okay. Takes practice. Please know that. All right. Let's talk about impact on career and education. Um, it's really common for people with ADHD to change jobs a lot of the time or change majors a few times in college. Um, like I said, we like things that are passions to us. We like that stimulation. ADHD is about dopamine. It is a dopamine chase. So, um, but hyper focus is definitely a thing. Um, so if you can be in a job where you are interested in the overarching theme of the job, but you're doing different things all day, every day kind of thing, you're probably more likely to stay in that kind of a position. Again, this is why people in first responders, doctors, lawyers, nurses, counselors, all of those kinds of things. We're doing the same overarching theme every day in very, very different ways within the day. It's not uncommon for people with ADHD to have underperformance issues. Again, it is the having difficulty with the task prioritization or the task initiation, those types of things. You will have to figure out systems around that to get yourself to do the thing. Okay. I'm going to give you a lot of good resources at the end. Um, all right. Okay. So, if you are somebody who has not been diagnosed, or somebody with a later in life diagnosis, you may have experienced these things, or you may be kind of experiencing them now. There's still a lot of social stigma around ADHD, and a lot of internalized shame. Because again, we're kind of back to that what's wrong with me? How come I can't do the things everybody else seems capable? Stories that we tell ourselves. Those things are not true. We just have different gifts. But again, too, we are kind of back to that bipolar diagnosis that doctors may not understand because they are not well versed in mental health disorders. They have a class on it, they know broadly. That's great. We need them to know broadly. Um, but they may not know the intricacies of mental health disorders to be able to make a correct diagnosis. Um, and then oftentimes, like I said, diagnosis is happening later in life because your child gets diagnosed. And as you begin to learn more, you learn about the symptoms and you're like, oh, well, I actually relate a lot to those symptoms. So there are some challenges in seeking a diagnosis. I encourage you to go to somebody who really knows their stuff. Look for somebody who specializes in ADHD. Okay. All right. Um, these are some barriers as far as women are concerned with ADHD. Again, kind of we get lumped into this category of, oh, it's anxiety, or oh, it's depression, or oh, your hormones are imbalanced. Um, yes, and it's a yes, and. Um, the other piece, like I've said, is that you may be so high functioning. If a doctor is looking at you and going, well, you're doing just fine. Meanwhile, you won't let anybody in your house because it's a disaster. You're so far behind in work, you can't even like keep your nose above water. And your relationship at home is struggling because you lose it occasionally and your spouse doesn't like it, right? But they're seeing, this medical professional is seeing somebody who seems to have it all together. There's your perfectionism, right? So, um, again, I would kind of be remiss if I didn't bring up TikTok. um, I can't ignore the influence of TikTok, and I actually don't want to because I actually think it's been really good for a lot of people to look at TikTok and go, oh gosh, maybe I do have this. Here's the deal. You want to be careful with this, okay? Um, the thing you have to know about ADHD is that ADHD and a lot of other things, if you're looking at a Venn diagram, right? Two circles that overlap one another, this middle piece, there's a lot in the middle that could look like ADHD that isn't. A lot. Okay. So this is why I say, please go to a professional who knows their stuff. Um, Autism and ADHD share some things. If you, as a child, or if you, when you were born, you had oxygen cut off to your brain for any length of time that it caused a brain injury, could look like ADHD. There are some very intricate things that people need to know to be able to rule out to make sure that ADHD is what you've got. Okay. So please, please, please go to somebody who knows what they're doing. Okay. You may have all the symptoms of ADHD, but it still could be something else. Or it could be that and. Okay. All right. For people who have gotten a later in life diagnosis, um, I am suspecting that these are the things that you have kind of dealt with your whole life that you were like, I do not understand why this keeps happening. Um, this is really common. Okay. If you get diagnosed later in life, it is also really common to look back at your life and feel some grief around it all and some sadness. Some, gosh, how could things have been different if, right? So, um, if you are somebody who is dealing with these things, the struggling with the symptoms, and you don't understand what the cause is, the chronic stress, the burnout, strained relationships, feeling misunderstood and isolated, please, please, please seek help. Okay. Um, it's important to figure out what's going on because life does not have to look like that. All right. So, treatment and support needs. Like I said before, we are all different, okay? And it may not be ADHD. This is why a comprehensive assessment is really important. Each person is different. We show up with different executive functioning skills, and this is why it looks different for everyone. Okay. Everyone is going to want to handle their ADHD differently, and that should be applauded. The right way is the way that works best for you. Okay. There are options. All right. So make sure that you have got somebody that understands it. And you've got a team of medical professionals that understand what ADHD looks like. So let's look at some of these different ways. If we're going to go the non medication route, okay, it's an option, right? Here's kind of the sticking point of this option. And for some people, it's the option that they go with and they do it really well. And that is great. Okay. If you can get your sleep under control, then you're winning. Okay. Because your day begins when you go to sleep the night before. If you think about that for just a second, right? If you were somebody who was up until 1 or 2 o'clock last night, you probably don't feel so great today, right? If you were able to, and I use those words wisely, able to go to sleep at 10:15 last night, which is when my phone shuts off. And I did go to sleep at 10:15 last night, then today is probably an okay day, right? So sleep is kind of the core number one thing about managing ADHD if you're not going to do medication. All right. Um, there's a book that I have written in resources called The Miracle Morning, and it has some really great outlines for how to wind down your evening so that you have a good night's sleep and then pick up in the morning so that you have a great day. So Having those routines is really important if you have ADHD. Um, Diet and exercise are also really key if you're not wanting to manage ADHD with meds. Diet does matter. Okay. So more whole foods, less sugar, um, lower glycemic is better because inflammation is a part of ADHD. Um, Lifting weights is great. Doing some cardio is great. I will say you do too much cardio, you tend to also then raise your cortisol levels. So having some mixture of that in there. I will also say that I love this picture. However, there is also something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and it runs alongside ADHD a lot of the time. It is a connective tissue issue. Okay. So things like what this woman is doing in this slide, right? You probably, if you have Ehlers-Danlos, you could probably do that really easily. Really doesn't matter what age you are. You could probably kind of pretzel yourself, whatever. Um, Please be careful with that because if you have a connective tissue issue, it's very easy to overdo that and then injure yourself. So, um, mindfulness and meditation is super important. And you probably are thinking, lady, I cannot get my mind to stop. You want me to sit down and meditate? I would say that 1 minute in the morning suffices. 1 minute. I do my 1 minute in the morning before my feet hit the floor. Otherwise, I won't remember to do it. 1 minute. You're going to have all those thoughts come through your head. That's okay. Focus on your breathing. That's it. That's all you've got to do for 1 minute. Okay. It really does help. All right. If you want to do meds, meds will not make you normal. It will not make it all go away. All right. You are normal. You will learn how to incorporate systems into your life that are helpful for you. All right. Um, a normal brain functions here with dopamine. Okay. An ADHD brain functions here with dopamine. We do not have enough dopamine in our brains. All right. Meds actually bring us up to the functioning spot with dopamine. All right. People get concerned all the time. Oh my gosh, meds are going to, like, I'll be addicted to them. Nope, that's not what meds do for us. We like how we feel on them. We can concentrate, we can focus, we can get things done, we can have better task initiation, right? But we're not addicted to them. I can still function without these. That's fine. I don't like how I function necessarily because it's not as good as when I take them. But my meds don't bring me up here, where if somebody who didn't need these medications, right, would start with their normal dopamine functioning, and then you're up here. That's not what happens for us. We're down here, just up to normal. Okay. There are some things that you want to watch for, though. Meds can make anxiety worse. So you may want to have your anxiety under control when you look at medication for ADHD. You need to talk to your doctor about that. And then there are certain side effects that happen too with some medications. You might have dry mouth or a decreased appetite, headaches, difficulty sleeping if you've taken your medication too late in the day, or it's not the right medication for you, or you're taking too much medication. An increased heart rate. Those often are the kinds of things that people struggle with that. I will mention, and I'll put these in the resources too, GenoMind and GenoWise. They are a mouth swab. Some offices are doing this now. They will give you a genetic look at which medications may work better for you or may not. And they are kind of grouped by classifications. All right. Time management. I want to touch on this briefly. I know we're running on time here. Time management tools are great if they work for you. You have to find the ones that work for you. Okay. Use whatever makes sense to you. Don't try and do too much, right? Don't have two calendars. That's not going to work for you. You're not going to like be able to remember all the things on this calendar and all the things on this calendar. One calendar. Reminders on your phone are great as long as those work for you. Post-its might be better. I have a post-it on my door in my bathroom to my closet door that says leave open because there's no heat in our closet. And so it gets really cold in there. But I wouldn't remember to leave the closet door open if I didn't have the post-it there, right? So leave them in spots where it makes sense. Routine and environment. Here is the conundrum of ADHD. Oftentimes we hate routine and structure, and yet we thrive in it. So you have to figure out what that balance is for you. In any given day, you may not know how you're going to feel. So, time blocking your day every day from 11 to noon is when I'm going to answer email. And 11 to noon, you may be kaput because you haven't had any protein since, last night at 6 o'clock when you ate dinner because you're not a person who is hungry for breakfast. You may not know. So, I find for people with ADHD, it's easier to know here are the few things, and I don't say more than three. Here are the few things that I have to get done today. And then kind of it's a strike while the iron is hot. If you have something that you know is going to take some energy, plan that for a spot in the day when you think you may have energy and you may have to roll with it, right? But having bigger overarching systems and routines often work well for those of us with ADHD. And then the last thing is having self compassion. This is a major, major practice to take up, and it is imperative that you do so. We are far easier on our friends than we are on us. So embrace your flaws. It's okay. We all have them. I am somebody who does not do math. By the way, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and dyslexia, and some other learning disorders also run concurrently with ADHD. I have dyscalculia. Math does not make sense to me. And that's okay. I have systems to help me with that. But that's the way it goes. I have to embrace that. I always say I don't math. I do people. um, you're going to have to figure out what works for you. Having support from loved ones is really important though. Okay. So please find your group. Sometimes you're going to be able to do the things and sometimes you're not. Your partners are going to have some patience with you. And I would say if you are a partner, please remember that this is a neurological issue that they were born with, right? If you were married to somebody or partnered with somebody who had a heart issue from birth, you would not expect that they are going to be able to run a marathon every day. Some days, maybe they could. Other days, it's not going to work. This is how ADHD runs. We have to have incredibly loving and supportive partners. Okay. Friends who understand that it is not personal if you don't show up on time. You have to be very communicative with people. Okay. All right. If you are the partner of someone, you may need to use things like gentle prompts in our household. If we have to be someplace, my husband will say to me, Stephanie, we have 300 seconds to be out the door. Again, I don't math. So 300 seconds is actually 5 minutes, but 300 seconds sounds really important to me. So I know I'm supposed to get going, right? 600 minutes is 10 or 600 seconds is 10 minutes. Works for us, may not work for you. That's okay. All right. please know that there is help out there. Okay. Again, in the resources, I've got some things listed. There are support groups, there are online community resources, there are therapists and coaches out here who know what this is and how to help you. And then the last thing I'd say is, again, that self compassion piece is really important. There is nothing wrong with you. Okay. In fact, there's a lot of stuff that's really cool about you. You're probably very artistic. You're probably very smart. You're probably very good at seeing patterns. There's a lot that is really, really good about you. Spend time with the creative parts of your life. Do the things that bring that creativity. Um, the more that we can advocate for ourselves, the better off we are. Yes, this is being recorded, so you will get a recording of this. All right. So, again, nothing is wrong with you. This is how you were built. Please be sure that you get a diagnosis from a professional who knows their stuff, and then learn about ADHD and figure out the systems that work for you. No two people with ADHD are going to look the same. And then please check the resources that I'm sending out. All right. There are great books, podcasts, websites, all sorts of things. And find a good counselor or therapist if you need one. Thank you all very much for your time and attention today. And I really, really appreciate it. And I'm so happy that you get to have this information. And please feel free to follow up. Here is my email. And it's been a delight. Take care.